Good evening. Today, we're going to cover the topic of supply and demand. Last week, we talked about this is chapter two of the issues in economics, and I'm pretty sure that you, as a student, have um, already read this chapters. And last week, we talked about the opportunity cost and marginal analysis. Now, this week, chapter two is going to be the most important topic, I would say, of all the topics that we're going to cover. And it is the most fundamental aspect about the economics, and that is the supply and demand. So, if you can understand quantitatively and qualitatively the ideas about the supply and demand, then you're pretty much 50% all done with the economic class. The as I mentioned before, economics is a study of the supply and demand actually, and if you understand and also the concept is very important. So some of the concept that may be kind of intuitive to some of you, but as far as the economist's point of view, it may have a very different definition and meaning. So you have to always keep that in mind. And also another thing that we as economists tend to do is to try to graph it and quantify a lot of different concepts and idea into a graph. So in this session, I'm going to be talking about a lot of different concepts using the graphs and supply and demand graphs. So I'm going to be sharing this screen with you today. And there we go. So chapter two, we're going to cover the topic of supply and demand and the issue in economics today by Professor Gill. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is that we're going to cover a lot of some of the definitions of supply and demand, and also that we're going to look at the supply and demand model and all about the demands. We're also talk about the demand, what the demand is, what it constitutes, and give you some examples that are in the textbook as well as in the real market. And also, we're going to talk about the supply as well. What does it mean when we say supply model versus the demand model? And what are the determinant? What determines the demand and also what determines the supply? And then the effect of changes in price expectation on supply and demand model. So price is going to be the predominant factor in terms of supply and demand, and we're going to see how those are related. And we're going to talk about also the equilibrium and why there is the new equilibrium on the supply and demand model. So, as I explained to you before in the previous chapter, if you look at the person who wrote this textbook, Dr. Gill, what he would like to do is to kind of look at graph everything in terms of economy and how the goods and services are impacted in all the natural economy. So he just gives give you a good and quick diagram of the economy. So you know you have a firm and a government and households and goods and services and the market and foreign exchange is how they interplay. So what we are talking about is market and also supply of goods and services. Okay, so definition. Let's get down to the definition. Supply and demand. The name of the most important model is in all economic. You probably heard what the supply and demand looks like, right? So supply and demands are the demands uh, that a lot of economists, not only just economists, but most of the business writers and news writers, they use a supply and demand model, and those terms are very common. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to really look at a more of a very detailed definition of what the supply and demand model is. Okay, so I'm going to Okay, now we're back. The when the price is the way we have defined it is the amount of money or the currency that must be paid for a unit of output. Okay, the price is the amount of money that you must be paid for unit of output. Okay, when we talk about prices, we're not only talking about the demand side of things, what you need to buy in terms of price, but also price in terms of production as well. So that's what we're talking about the output. Okay. And then market. What is a market? A market is any kind of mechanism by which buyer and seller negotiate price. So when you say a market, we're really are talking about market in terms of uh, we can be talking about a market in certain segment, market in certain cities, market in certain block of neighborhood. So market can be anything and everywhere, but as long as it has an element of mechanism by which buyer and seller they kind of negotiate the price and come down to the settlement and they exchange goods. Okay, that's what the market is. Okay, it can be any physical location, it could be a virtual location as well. Okay, and an output is the goods or services and or amount of is sold. Okay, we're not only going to be talking about the goods or actual physical item, but also we're also going to be talking about services. So supply and demand model is not only applicable to the goods and goods, but also the services as well. Okay, that intangible stuff. Okay, so consumers are those people in the market, or those consumer can be not just necessarily people, but it could be a group of people or an entity as well in the market who are wanting to exchange money for goods and services. For example, business to consumer or B2C is primarily the consumers are the people, right? The consumers, but B2B, business models are primarily the consumers are the businesses, right? So you're selling, doing a business, you're selling and buying a business among the group of businesses themselves. So that's why we want to say consumers are not only a people, but also a corporation as well. Producers are those people or those entities in the market who are wanting to exchange goods or services. So basically, what you're doing is the producers are people who make things or who sell things. Okay, there are sellers and buyers, right? So producers not only can be a producer who makes it and sells it, but it can be a retail stores or retailers or agent or broker, those who are seller of the particular services or goods. Okay, and equilibrium price is the price at which no consumer wish they could have purchased more goods at that price. No producers wish that they could have sold more. Now, this is kind of very long-winded, very technical definition, but basically, equilibrium price is like is the average price where the seller and the buyer agree upon the price. Okay, that's the price that both parties agree, okay, I will sell at this price and I'll buy at this price, right? That's the negotiated price in a very plain, simple term, okay? But equilibrium prices, we're talking about uh, um, in a context of supply and demand, the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So when we talk about equilibrium prices, it has a slightly different implication, as you'll see. So equilibrium quantity is the amount of output or amount of output that you of goods or services that you exchange at the equilibrium price. Okay. All right, and quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Okay, so we're talking about quantity demanded and quantity supplied. So quantity demanded is how much consumers are willing and able to buy at a particular price during the particular time. Okay, and then the quantity supply is how much firms are willing and able to sell at a particular price during a particular period of time. All right. So what is the market? Well, market can be, like I said, it can be anything where there's a buyer and a seller. It could be real physical market, like a flea market, And if you go to a lot of countries, you have an outdoor market, right? Where people, there's vendors, so there are people who are trying to sell things, and there are a lot of consumer who's actually trying to buy things, okay? And typically you had a seller and a buyer, and they go and they try to come at the agreed upon price. It's not like in America where the price is really everything is set because that's what the seller assumed the price is going to be. But a lot of foreign countries, if you go to especially third world country, you have to actually negotiate in a retail shop. Just buy something. If you want to buy a bag of 1 kilos of apple, you don't say, okay, how much? You just negotiate the price. So if the seller is wanting to pay this much, then the buyer negotiate to get the price down. In typically situation, okay? And then the price typically varies from morning until night. So the price also varies. So when we talk about the market, we have to take into consideration of the capitalism. Okay, capitalism is basically a free market in a financial capital as well as goods and services. So in a capitalistic society or capitalistic market, you have a seller and a buyer, and you have a free market. Basically, seller is willing to sell at any price or typically at the highest price, and the buyer is typically trying to buy the goods and services at the lowest price as possible. Okay, and then capitalism is the concept in which there's a free market and freedom to borrow and lend, and profit to go to the owner of the capital. Okay, versus the communism. Communism is the diametrically opposite of the free market capitalism, where communism is a centrally controlled and capital and the profit that it generates is controlled by the government authority. And then the government authority decides how the money is distributed and used. Okay. And now there's a lot of people have kind of mixed the communism and socialism they go vice versa. But there's a significant difference between the communism and socialism. Socialism there's a significant part of the profit generated by the financial capital goes to government in forms of taxes. Okay, and the government uses the tax money to counter the wealth impacts of the distribution of a profit. So if you look at the overall things, every country has a little bit of element of all three of them. Okay, they may be predominantly capitalistic society, and their law is based upon the capitalism, but in some element, in some forms, there's some element of communism, and there's some element of socialism, even in the United States, for example, right? If you look at a lot of industry, okay, there are many elements of socialism and there are many elements of communism, okay, where the price is controlled by the government, and capital and profit that it generates is controlled by the government. For example, like postal authority, right? Postal authority, right? The people who deliver the mail, okay, those are controlled by the government, and then service price is set by the government, okay, not by the market but by the government. Okay, so those are the elements that are in the capitalistic society that sometimes has element of communism and socialism. So I also want to talk about the freedom of economic freedom. Okay, so in the textbook, Gill, I'll say Gill, Dr. Gill, talks a little bit extensively about the freedom. Okay, freedom in the marketplace. Basically, when you have a free market, basically a seller and a buyer of any kind of goods and services has the freedom to sell at any price and buy at any price. And when they meet and agree upon certain prices, that's where the transaction happens. Okay, and the most free of all the countries that we can think of are listed in that textbook. And here are the list: Hong Kong, Singapore, Ireland, Luxembourg, United States, Iceland. These are some of the countries what you may consider to be have a free economic model or much more capitalistic market. Okay, and these are the countries that are listed as as the most or least economic free has the least economic freedom, which is Nigeria, Haiti, Turkmenistan, Laos, Cuba, Belarus, Venezuela. In fact, Venezuela is outright communist and socialist country, and Libya, Zambia, Burma, Iran, and North Korea. Obviously, North Korea is a communist country. Okay, so there's no free economy or free market. Okay, so another important concept that we really need to focus on is the concept called the ceteris paribus. Okay, what that means is when we look at the market itself is economy, and the market itself is there's so many different factors. I mean, it's when you try to figure out the price of certain, wheats or price of cars, it's really hard to describe and quantify the exact number. Okay. So, in order to really simplify things and to make it more easier for us to understand, we use the term what is called the as is or assumption. Okay. There's inherent assumption in any kind of graph or model that we use. Assumption is that people will always want to sell at the highest price, and assumption that people will always want to buy at the lowest price, right? And that is common assumption we can have. And also the assumption is that there's an inherent limitation. Typically, when we do a supply and demand analysis, we assume that the technology is very steady, means that there's no change in technology and there's no change in the way people do businesses. Okay, and same thing with the supply too. The supply, I mean, the demand too. The demand is always constant in the sense of there are constant number of people buying stuff. There are constant number, the taste of people, the people who are buying are the constant. So, in order to make some sense out of the model, we assume there are certain things are to be true or not true. Okay, that's what ceteris paribus means. Okay, they're kind of like a scientist. We conduct experiment in the laboratory, right? Scientists use the replication and verification to ensure the accuracy of the conclusion. And the social scientists, on the other hand, cannot experiment on the subject, right? Because how can we experiment like in a country, right? As a whole, there's no way for us to experiment. So we must use model. A social scientist, like an economist, must use the model to look at the effects of individuals. Okay, and also the economists too. We're social scientists, hold a variable constant within a model to examine the effects of other variables, and we used, like I said before, use the Latin phrase what's called the ceteris paribus, which means holding all things equal. We assume all things being equal or all things being constant, not changing. Okay. Okay. So demand and supply. Okay. Demand and supply. Demand is the relationship between price and quantity demanded, and the ceteris paribus. Okay. This is a very important concept. Okay. And supply is the relationship between price and quantity supply, ceteris paribus. Okay. You just know whenever you look at the graph, okay, and look at the supply and demand, you have to know what assumptions are. Okay, what are they talking about? Are they talking about supply and demand in terms of certain market size or certain cities? Okay, certain city blocks or as a country as a whole. Okay, and then also you have to do a lot of you have to find out what the assumptions are. Okay, okay, supply and demand model. Okay, so demand schedule represent in tabular form the price and quantity demanded for goods. Okay, so the demand. We're going to look at the demand schedule. Demand schedule present in tabular form price and quantity demand for goods. Okay, so here are some of the examples. It's very simple. Demand schedules, as you saw in the book. in the textbook of um, uh, textbook. It's just a list of all different prices that's incrementally going up, and then individual demand, and then there's a quantity demand. Individual demand is, for in this example, in the textbook, I believe they use the orange juice as individual demand, and the quantity or the demand for the whole unit or whole city or whole not just individual but the whole group of people. Okay, so if you plot this demand on a graph, um, this is what it looks like. Okay, so we have a demand here. So essentially, what this means is basically, um, at if you're selling orange juice at $2, okay, and by a street vendor, okay, basically you can sell, okay, about 10,000 orange juice per day, okay, or per week. So let's just say this is a per week, okay. So if you're selling $2, so if you have a $1.50 as a price, okay, probably you will probably have a people buying this stuff about 20,000 quantities. Okay, $20, 20,000 orange juices, so on and so forth. So as you lower down the prices, the demand for the quantity of orange juices increases. So that's what really this means. Okay, so if you draw a straight line, this is what the demand curve looks like. It's sloping downward. Okay, in a straight fashion way. So this is where the demand is straight in a straight line. Okay, so this is what's called the demand curve. Okay, so there's a supply side. Okay, so people who are making the orange juice. Okay, so the supply schedule present in the tabular form: price and quantity supply for goods. Okay, this is a supply schedule. As this is a supply schedule as the price of goods being sold, right? So supply schedule is always from the perspective of people who either produce it or people who sells the product. Okay, not the buyer like the demand. Demand is the perspective in which you are buying from the buyer perspective, but supply is the supplier is the person who is making it or selling it. Okay, so this is a seller, or maker. Okay, okay. So as the price incrementally increases, okay, the supply, okay, supplier, okay, they want to make more money, right? They want to supply more and more stuff, quantity of stuff, right? So if the prices go down, okay, then they want to reduce the quantity that they're selling, right? It's very, very obvious and intuitive in nature, right? So here's what the supply curve looks like. Okay, here's one, two, three. Okay, so at price of $1, let's say, okay, the supplier is willing to produce about 10,000 orange juices. Okay, and at $1.50, okay, supplier is willing to produce about 20,000 orange juices, and so on and so forth. So if you plot this line all the way, it's going to be a straight line. Okay, so this is what the supplier, people who are making or people who are selling. Okay, that's what the supply curve is. Okay, okay. Now, if you combine, okay, so there's a term called the equilibrium, shortages, and surpluses, which I'm going to be explaining it in a little bit in details. Okay, equilibrium is the point where the amount that consumer wants or the buyer and the amount that firm wants to sell, the producer who are willing to sell, are the same. Okay, so that's where the equilibrium is. Okay, so if you transpose that supply and demand, which I'm going to be showing you, you will reach a point where there's an equilibrium, and that's the point, that's the magic point where the supply and the demand equals. Okay, And anything, the shortages is like the condition where the firm do not want to sell as many consumer wants to buy. Okay, sometimes there's a shortage of supply. You know why? Because the producer they don't want to sell that many products as before at that specific price, or there may be shortage due to the supplier. Okay, shortage, excess demand. Okay, so excess demand. There's a shortage caused by the excess demand, or there's a surplus caused by the excess supply. There's the condition where the firm wants to sell more than the consumer wants. The shortage can happen because of the excess in demand because people really want it really quickly, or shortage can happen because of the supplier. Let's say orange juice, some truck coming from a orange truck that's coming from another city ran into an accident, and the whole orange is completely gone. What happened to the orange maker? Okay, people who are street vendor who's making orange juice. Obviously, there's a shortage, right? So because there's a shortage, there can be a shortage in supply. Okay, so same thing with the surplus. If there's this excess surpluses, okay, let's say a orange is plenty and there's so many orange to be going around that they want to make more supplies, then there's a surplus of the supply in the market. Okay, so if you combine supply and demand schedule, okay, and this is what the graphic looks like. And if you look at the graph, okay, if you combine the supply and demand curve together, okay, this is what it looks like, okay, and this is the point where this is the equilibrium, right? Equilibrium. Okay, this is when the supply and demand meets together. Okay, that's price and the quantity in which there's the equilibrium. Okay, now this is our equilibrium. Okay, at so $1.50. Okay, you will sell 20,000 quantity. Okay, there's a demand of 20,000. Okay, so that's the supplier and the demand. The consumers are happy. Okay, so all about demand, the law of demand. We have to really make an assumption in this kind of model. Uh, there's the relationship between the price and quantity demanded is a negative or inverse one. Okay, so what it really basically means is that as the price decreases, there's more demand, right? Okay, so as the price decreases, there's more demand. Okay, so basically, what it means is basically, let me show you in a graph like this. Okay, there's a supply and there's a demand, right? There's a supply and demand, basically. So basically, it's inversely related. So the demand is going from this low to high. I mean, high to low, and the supply is going from low to high. Okay, that's what inverse relationship is. Price of the supply, okay, goes up, okay, I mean the price of supply goes up, okay, as the quantity increases, okay, versus demand, the quantity goes down as the quantity goes up as the price decreases. So that's what the inverse relationship is all about. So why do law of demand make sense? Okay, uh, there's uh, hmm, there's let's go. So what does it mean by the law of demand makes sense? Why is it going downward? Okay, why is the demand going downward like this? Okay, quantity and price. Okay, why is it going like that? Okay, why is it that demand, when the price decreases, that people want more? And why is that when the price increases in the demand, that people will want less? Okay, why is that? One of the reasons is called the substitution effect. Okay, so let me give you a live example. Okay, let's suppose that the orange juice that the street vendor sells. Okay, they increase the price from $1.50 all the way to let's say $5. Okay, now $1.50 to $5. That's a lot of increase. Okay, so if there is a rather than people buying orange juice, oh well, I'm just going to buy, Diet Coke or Pepsi instead of buying orange juice. No matter how good the orange juice is, it's they're not willing to pay that much money to buy it because I could always substitute it for buying a either Pepsi or other drinks like the apple juice or lemonade instead of orange juice, right? So that is the substitution effect. Okay, so move people towards good that is not cheaper, away from good that is not more expensive. Okay, the real balance effect. The real balance effect is when a price increases, it decreases your buying power, causing you to buy less. Okay, so this is a very technical term, but the real balance effectively means when the price increases, let's say, when the price increases, you can say the price increases, but your purchasing power decreases as well, right? It used to be that for if you have a $5, right? Let's say $5, you could buy two and a half, you know, cups of orange juice. Now, if they increase to $5, you can only buy one orange juice. Okay, so the buying purchasing power of that $5 has decreased. Okay, that's what real balance effect means. Okay, so and then there's another concept. Okay, there's another concept that is important to keep in mind is it's called the law of diminishing marginal utility. Basically, what it is basically it is as a consumer, if you drink orange juice, let's say you have one or two orange juices a day, first cup or first orange juice that you buy and then you drink it, it satisfies your thirst and it tastes very good. Okay, but if you buy four or five orange juice, okay, all at the same price, okay, and then you drink one, you drink the second one, you drink the third one, you drink the fourth one, and by the time you drink the fifth one, what happened? It gives you much less satisfaction, right? Because the first one, you were drinking it because it tastes good, you're thirsty. But by the time you get to go drink the fifth one, you're much less satisfied with the orange juice. And that's just the human nature. That's how our consumptions are. Okay. That's what's called the law of diminishing marginal utility. As you consume more as an individual or as a group, okay, that satisfaction that you get out of that having additional orange juice diminishes or decreases. Okay, let's say you buy a car, even a car. Okay, you buy a car. The first car that you buy is wow, man. It's just like you can't wait. You take care of it, and you're generally very very satisfied with it. Now you buy a second car. Okay, it could be the same or it could be the different, but there's a extremely difference between the having buying a first car and buying a second car, right? Because the second car it gives you much less satisfaction than the buying a first car because second car, well, you already had first car, right? So it's nothing. It's kind of excites you, right? So that's what's called the law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay, you're less satisfied as you consume more and more things. Okay, in technical jargon, it's the amount of additional happiness that you get from additional unit of consumption falls with each additional unit. Phew, that's a that's a lot of words. Okay, but essentially that's the law of diminishing marginal utility. Yes. Okay. Now, when we talk about the law of supply, law of supply is now I'm going to talk about the law of supply. The law of supply is the statement that there is a positive relationship between the price and quantity supply. Okay, this may not, this may be very obvious, but like I said, as to the economic eyes and for the sake of analysis, the recognition that there's a positive relationship between the price and quantity supply is very significant. That's why the supply curve it slopes upward as you go right, because there is a positive relationship between the price and quantity supply. Okay, so let's see. Okay, why does the law of supply make sense? Essentially, the law of supply makes sense is because uh, if you recall that the because of the increase in marginal cost, firms require higher price to produce more output. Now that could be partially true if the supply curve looks like this. Okay, here's the supply curve. Okay, supply curve looks like this. Okay, the supply curve. Okay, now in this case, the increasing marginal cost. Okay, firms require higher price to produce. Okay, so basically, as quantity of goods that you would produce, okay, that you produce, okay, the more you produce, okay, the price that you put, the marginal cost is goes higher and higher because you're producing more of it. Okay, this curve represents this statement that increasing marginal cost. Now, is if the supply curve looks like this, like in a straight line, okay, oops, straight line like this, okay, there is no increasing marginal cost because marginal cost is always going to be the same, okay, no matter what, because it's in a straight line, okay? The difference in cost between producing per unit of 10 orange juices versus 30 orange juices, they're all the same, okay? So when you have a straight line of supply, that means that the marginal costs are the same. But when you have a sloping line like this, okay, in terms of supply, that means that there's a marginal cost is increasing. Okay, the more you produce, that production per unit is going to cost per unit is going to increase. Okay, that's what increasing marginal cost means. Okay, so what, and then I'm going to talk about the determinants of demand. Okay, what determines the demand? As you may call it, the demand looks like what? This, right? Demand. Okay, demand looks like this. There's a price, quantity of demand, right? So, like an orange juice, for example, it could be applied to the car. Okay, it could be applied to your computer. It could be applied to your cereals. It could be anything. Okay, any consumer goods. Okay, the taste in oranges, for example, in a textbook we always get oranges. It's very very bland and very good example of a taste. So the taste in demand you it just assume it's constant, right? So let's say a taste and demand. Okay, taste. Let's say, oh, people's taste and demand of orange juice has changed. Okay, some doctors reported that orange juice is really, really good for you. Okay, okay, and everybody realized, wow, I need to drink more orange juice. So what's going to happen to the demand? Okay, it's going to go up. Okay, like this. Okay, so now there's a new demand here. Okay, D1, D2. Okay, so as people demand more, okay, as demand more, the price, I mean, as the people's taste changes, okay, the demand will increase like this. Okay, so let's say it's an opposite. Okay, let's say orange juice during the cold winter, right? People don't want to drink cold orange juice. Okay, so what's going to happen during the cold winter time, like in Chicago, where I'm from? Okay, what's going to happen to the demand of orange juice? Okay, it's going to go down, right? So demand will be here. Okay, demand will go down during the wintertime, right? Because people's taste in orange juice change over different season, right? So that's why you have to always assume that this demand is for whatever. In Chicago, summertime, okay? So there always has to be that assumption, okay? So it also depends on income too. So income is ability of people to buy stuff, right? So if you have an income of whatever $50,000, $70, okay, people who earns $150,000 will have a different demand for propensity for orange than people who earns $30,000 a year or $25,000 a year, right? Because they're limited in terms of income, right? So as the income increases, most of the consumer cases, the demand will increase as well. Okay, and as the income decreases, the demand for orange juices decreases. Okay, it goes to D3. Okay, for the normal goods. Okay, for the normal goods like orange juice. Okay, for maybe for Coca-Cola. Okay, which may be considered an inferior goods, right? It's not really healthy, it's sugary, it tastes good, okay? But it keeps you, it tastes good, and that's all it is. And then people are not, it's really not good for you, okay? So as the income increases, chances are, okay, for Coca-Cola, okay, the demand will decreases because people will buy what? They'll probably buy orange juice or have other type of good, healthy drinks like orange juice, or grapefruit juice, or a lemon juice, or other type of juice, rather than drinking Coke, right? So also, the demand is dependent upon the price of other goods, as I mentioned before. Okay, let's take an example of orange juice. Okay, orange juice. Okay, what are the competitor of orange juice? Okay, it could be a grapefruit juice, it could be apple juice, it could be other type of fruit juices, right? So if the fruit juice of other competitive products, okay, decreases, okay, chances are that people will switch to other product, okay? It's called a substitution effect, okay? And demand will go down, okay? So if the prices of other goods, such as a complement or substitute, as I mentioned, okay, that determines also the demand, okay? Populations of potential buyers, okay? If you have a population that increases, okay, obviously the demand will increases, okay? And also the expected price, okay? Supply and demand depend on the expected price. What is expected price? I mean, expected price is like, let's say, let's say there is a disaster that's going to be happening. Like, remember about 6 months ago, during the Trump campaign or during the COVID-19 when they had a lockdown, right? What happened? You know, people thought that they're going to shut down all the grocery stores, right? So what happened? People went in there and buy the whole thing, right? Buy their potatoes, onions, cereals, milk, cheese, whatever. Okay. So for that month, the demand of any kind of supermarket product, including orange juice, has skyrocketed. You can't even find any stuff in the shelf anymore. Okay. Because the expectations of the price, okay, because they believe the price will increase. So before the price increases, people want to just pour them out. Okay. So okay. So we did kind of practice on this before, the taste of income. We did whether the demand curve will increase or decrease. Okay. So we did this exercise before, so I'm not going to go through each individual one. Okay. Effects of increase in demand, okay, is what it is. Don't be so alarmed by these figures or the technicalities of it. But you do need to understand, okay, this graph. supply and demand and price and quantity. I want you to get this in your head. You really need to understand the supply and demand model. Okay. So if you combine supply and demand together, okay, you have and you will achieve what's called equilibrium, right? So for the orange juice, okay, the optimum price where the supply and demand is at $150, I mean $1.50, and at that $1.50 price, you're going to sell about 20,000. Okay, 20,000. Okay, 20,000. Okay, 20,000 orange juices. Okay, it could be week, it could be month, it could be year, whatever the case may be. Okay, so if the demand increases, let's say um, some very famous doctors announced that, hey, orange juice has so much vitamin C, and it has been proven by the medical establishment that the orange drinking 3 cups of orange juice will boost up your immune system and it will protect you against the cancer. Okay, 5 times cancer rate is reduced. Okay, now as soon as that makes announcement, guess what? Guess what the demand for orange juices are? It increases dramatically, like this. Okay, remember the demand increases, right? Okay, so now what's going to be happening to the price of the orange juice if that happens? Okay, the demand increases, then the new equilibrium is going to be right here, right at $2. The price increases because there's so much demand. Okay, and the supplier, he's happy to supply about 30,000 quantity of orange juice, 20,000 quantity of orange juice at $2, $2 each. Okay, so that's where new equilibrium will reach. Okay, if the demand increases. Okay, there's a new equilibrium. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. Now, effective decrease in demand. Okay, let's say you have a, ooh, man, that's just like uh, okay, people all of a sudden has have let's say there's alternative drinks out there, okay, that is comparable to orange juice. Let's people who drink use orange juice. There's an alternative hybrid type of orange juice. Let's say tangerine orange juice, okay, tangerine juice. Let's say, and it's selling like a hotcake. Okay, so what's going to happen to the demand for orange juice? Obviously, it's gonna decrease, right? So it's gonna look like, okay, so it's gonna look like this, okay? So demand will shift downward, right? Okay, so now the demand decreases. What happens? This is the old equilibrium. Now the new equilibrium will be right here at dollars. So in order to make, okay, in order to have a suppliers or who are the producers be happy and also the consumer to be happy, okay, they have to sell it. They have to lower the price, okay, to about $1, okay, and they will sell about 10,000 orange juices, okay. Here's a new demand and here's a new equilibrium, okay. So, so if you really put your kind of like a thinking cap on, okay, what are some of the determinants? What determines the supply? Okay, we normally we talk about the demand or the consumer, people who buy, right? Suppliers are the people who sells things, right? Or people who makes things and sell to the consumers. Okay, so for their from their perspective, the supply, the supplier, right? Them, okay, suppliers. From the supplier perspective, what is the determinant? What caused the supply to go this way or that way? Okay, okay, okay. So what are the determinant of price? Okay, well, if you're making goods like an orange juice, okay, you have a price input, right? You have a cost, like a raw material cost, right? of the orange. That is the determinant as well, right? And also the technology, okay? Right now, the technology is used for making orange juice. It's like you have to chop it up and then use your kind of hand as a small blender to actually make the orange juice, okay? Let's say there's a portable technology. Let's say there's a portable technology, a portable machine where if you just dump the orange juice in, and then voila, it just out at the end of the machine comes out an orange juice. Okay, you don't have to do anything. Instead of now making orange juice by hand, you can make, you know, instead of making orange juice like 100 orange juice per hour, now you can make over 200 orange juice per hour. Okay, without any additional labor. If that's the case, if there's a technological improvement, the supply will shift towards your right because you can now make more stuff, okay, at the same price, okay, like this, okay, or even at a lower cost, okay. So the supply will shift. You can see this supply in the most radical example is in the computer, right? Computer. Every year the technology improves, right? There's a new way to making the computer much more cheaper, right? Even the mobile phone too. Mobile phone when iPhone came out, I mean, it cost over $1,000, right? But every year the price of mobile phone has gone down, or the computer price of computer has gone down. Why? Because the technology. There's a new way to make computer, making computer more efficient, making smartphone more efficient, making TV more efficient, right? Even 10 years ago, if you want to buy a 54-inch flat screen TV, my God, you have to pay like, you know, $2,000, $3,000, okay, $4,000, right? Right now, you can get fairly good size, 54-inch TV, LCD TV, um, for less than $1,000. Why? It's because of technology. They have found a way to improve the production of the TV at a much cheaper price than ever before. So every year technology improves, and thus the supply increases. Okay, making the price go lower. Okay. All right. So what other things? Price of other potential outputs or number of sellers. Okay, let's say there's a price of other potential output. Okay, well, we'll talk about that later, but a number of sellers. Okay, let's say there are a lot more vendors who sells orange juice. There's a 7-Eleven. There's other vendors out in every corner that sells orange juice during the hot summer. Okay, what's going to happen to the supply? The supply is going to increase, right? If the supply increases, what happened to the price? Price will eventually drop, right? So the determinant of supply is dependent upon the number of suppliers, right? Or people who sell things. And also the determinant of supply is expected future price as well. Just like a demand curve, in the supply curve or supply determinant, expected future price. Sometimes if you have limited supply of goods, let's say this is especially true like commodity prices like copper, steel, like coal, right? There's a only limited supply that you can carry from. You can dig it out from the ground, right? And then if you expect the future prices to go higher, what's going to happen? Well, they're just going to keep the supply until the price goes higher, right? They're not going to sell right now at a low price. They're going to wait until the price goes very high in the future. So they're going to withhold that price, right? So that also determines the supply of the goods and services. Okay, movement of supply. Went through that. Price of input, shift left. Technology, shift right or left. So all these things, I'm not going to go into details. You can just kind of get a practice at it while you're reading a textbook. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the increase in supply. So if you increase the supply of orange juice, okay, And what's going to happen? Okay, let's say if you increase the supply, okay, and the supply and demand curve, let's say supply went from here to here, okay? So what's going to happen? The price will, the new equilibrium price is going to be over here because now you have more suppliers selling orange juice. So there's going to be pressure to sell more orange juices. You assume the demands are the same, okay? Demands are this curve right here, okay? But if you have more suppliers selling the stuff, the price will decrease because the supplier has now increased. Supply has increased right here. And now the equilibrium price is at dollar. So you went from $1.50 to $1 because the supply increased. Okay? This is where the new equilibriums are. Okay? So if you decrease the supply, the same thing. Okay? If you decrease the supply curve will go here. Okay, it's going to decrease. Okay? And guess what? Price is going to increase, right? If you decrease the supply, price is going to increase. Well, you can say, Brian, this is so common sense. Why do you make it so complicated? No, but you need to understand the graphics. You need to understand the conceptual model as we go into the much more complicated, okay, much more complicated scenario. You need to have a concept and a model in which you need to understand so that it makes easier for you to understand the more complex scenarios. Okay, here's the new supply, and here's the new equilibrium. Okay, so why the new equilibrium? If there's a change in supply or demand, then without a change in the price of the goods, there will be a shortage or surplus, right? And shortage resulting from increase in demand. Okay, so basically, let's say you had a new demand, right? You have a new demand that goes from here to here. Okay, now the difference between this point and this point right here, there's a shortage, right? So supplier will probably try to produce more stuff, right? Okay, the supplier will probably try more to produce stuff. So he'll probably produce, okay, okay, produce this much more. Instead of 40, well, he's going to increase the price, okay, and this is going to be the new equilibrium. There's a shortage at $1.50. Okay, demand is going to be this much, but supplier can only supply 30,000 oranges. So the price is going to be settled right here. Okay, that's what the supply and demand is. If the demand increases, there's a shortage of the product. However, the shortage does not always mean that it's going to be supplied that much because supplier will probably increase the price and supply a little bit more, and new equilibrium will be reached, right? So the same thing with the surplus resulting from the decrease in the demand. Okay, if there's a decrease in the demand, there is a what? Surplus, right? There's a surplus of the demand, right? From here to here. A new equilibrium will be reached because if there's a surplus, well, obviously the supplier will decrease the supply to $10,000, 10,000 quantity. Okay. Oops. Okay. So here's another example: a shortage resulting from decrease in supply. So I want you to get familiar with this concept of suppliers and also the demand. And this is the end of chapter 2, and I will see you in chapter 3. Thank you so much.